Doodle doo 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 doo. Secrets of Sea of Secrets. Greetings, I'm Demonac, and this is a little behind the scenes on Sea of Secrets, episode number 3, Secrets and Lies. I'm not sure if anybody watching the Changelings in the cold open was actually surprised that the one taking the test turned out to be Jinx. But I felt I had to put up that pretense and present it as a twist, given that on the rooftop of the Ugly Mug, when asked if there were many other changelings, Jinx had responded that she didn't know any others. Because even in that moment, even when opening up her feelings, she responded to that question exactly as she was trained to respond. Launchpad, Jinx's player, was a little surprised after the episode, but was perfectly happy when I reassured him, no, see, she said she doesn't know any other changelings. And then the next episode opens with Jinx in changeling school, having her changeling skills being tested by another changeling. Because Jinx is a liar. She was raised as an orphan, though. That part was true. Trying to keep the student's identity a surprise is also responsible for some of the janky shots and framing, because theoretically Jinx's clothing and earring wouldn't change, so I was framing every shot to keep her earring out of the picture until the name reveal at the end. I did draw the instructor in her natural form, pale gray and with muted facial features, and I frigged around a bunch putting images through Photoshop filters to make the paintings stand out from the vector art of the show, and trying to create a half-decent reflection effect on the painting's protective glass, which is why I cheaped out by using just a palette-swapped elf woman and the Illud ambassador to Lorik as models. Though an ambassador is a lot easier to find paintings of than most Kua. However, as the final test individual, the one whose Burning Hands spell Jinx would have to steal, and whose form I would use for the other changelings, I thought it was smart to make that the appearance of the friendly dwarven ship captain at the end of the episode, to make it as clear as possible to the audience, without ever saying it explicitly, that Jinx had spotted a fellow changeling infiltrator, and that's how she knew they would help. Also, because it's not as clear in the show, I must point out that the ring pulse effect that helps members of this group identify one another, it's only visible if you are wearing one of their rings, and, though your ring is always broadcasting, so to speak, you only see other rings if you have activated yours by speaking the command word to the ring, which must be done once per day. Because secrets. In 3.5 D&D, they were trying to get away from the idea of poison being just another way of dealing damage. I don't have access to their design diaries, but I suspect two of the main reasons were: 8. If poison deals 1 damage per round, that's another nitpicky thing to track or to forget. 3.5 has a million such things. And it raises the question of, when does it end? If it ends on healing, like many bleed effects, which all raise the same problems I'm pretending they wanted to solve, but which are also very rare in the core books. If it only ends on healing, or worse, specific anti-poison spells, it becomes too easy to poison and run away, which causes a lot of problems, whether it's used against NPCs or, in the specialized spell version, players. If it has a duration, then you're adding even more durations to track, already a problem. Plus, you have to decide if the durations are each tracked separately, or how does poisoning target again, stack, or refresh the duration. It's all a mess. Reason B, 3rd edition D&D introduced the idea of ability damage. That some effects could damage your ability scores directly, reducing your capabilities, taking longer than hit point damage to heal, plus, if any ability score reaches 0, you are totally debilitated. Or, if it's intelligence or constitution, you just die. Now, some iconic monsters like intellect devourers might attack your stats, but the main way players interacted with the system was poison. So poison in 3rd Ed weakened you, say by dealing 2 strength or dex damage, rather than killing you. unless it did con damage, because the main effect of con is to give you hit points, so damaging con would reduce your hit points per level. Anyway, I bring all this up because the plant minions, those things stabbing for 1 damage, were trying to poison the players, but of course they all saved, so I never had to explain the 1 strength damage or whatever. Now, most poisons also have secondary damage, where, whether or not you saved against the initial damage, 10 rounds later, you have to save a second time. Because obviously I was being silly to pretend the designers cared about reducing bookkeeping. I didn't bring those up in the video because, of course, the affected players saved against these too. Plus, even if they hadn't, it was the only fight that day, and you heal 1 to 2 points of ability damage per night of rest anyway. The other reason I bring up ability damage is that Misho grabbed the Longtooth Elite feat to augment his Longtooth Shifter bite ability. In addition to regular damage, the feat makes his bite deal 1 point of constitution damage on each hit. Unlike poison, there's no saving throw, you just have to hit. The thing is, 1 con damage is really strange because of the way modern D&D ability scores work, with breakpoints at the even numbers. If your target has an even constitution score, which almost all player characters will, if you're using the point-buy system, which you should, then losing 1 constitution breaks that even number, and you lose 1 point from everything constitution affects. That's how ability scores work, but constitution affects your hit points, so if you have even con, like 14, and take 1 con damage, you actually lose 1 hit point per level. If you're level 10, that's 10 hit points, and for many tough or bruiser type monsters, they may have way more hit dice than their challenge rating, so a CR10 monster might lose 16 hit points or more. But if they had odd-numbered constitution, like 15, which is common among monsters because their ability scores don't have to be optimized, then 1 point of con damage does literally nothing. Your con drops from 15 to 14, nothing happens. And it's very strange to have an ability that does big bonus damage half the time, nothing the rest of the time, based on a random behind-the-curtain stat. So anyway, Misho can only bite once per round. He clearly chose Longtooth as his shifter type because the bite can be used as a secondary attack, which means when you make other attacks with a weapon, or in Misho's case his Incarnum claws, you can make 1 additional attack with a secondary weapon at -5 to hit. It's part of the rules that normally only gets applied to monsters. Standard core book player characters don't get natural weapons which can be used as secondary attacks. But anyway, the bite being only once per round means that even when he seems like he's making 1,000,000 attacks, way too many for his level, like his pounce, still only 1 of those attacks is the bite, and it's less likely to hit, and half the time when it does hit, that 1 point of con damage doesn't do anything. That's why it probably won't be mentioned much in the videos. I tried to show Blue's brainlock power in a cinematic fashion. It didn't come out how I wanted, partly due to the timing of the music I was squeezing it into. I had to make the scene move much faster than I originally wanted, and I didn't want to spend a huge amount of time on it doing new art or otherwise making it look better, especially if it was going to go by so fast.
I didn't exactly choose to be this way, but if you got a problem with me, let's see how you like it.
Blue's eyes glow, and we focus on the druid, zooming in to an extreme close-up of her eyes.
Get out of my mind!
Zoom back out, but the battlefield is gone. The road, the wagons, the ridge, replaced with the ominous crystal tubes from the lab where Blue's memory begins. Confused, she leans in, trying to see what is inside the tube, to see past her reflection. There's a flash, and her reflection is replaced with the druid herself, imprisoned inside the crystal tube. As we pan back out, she reacts in shock, pounding helplessly on the glass.
No!
Fade to black. Transition back to the extreme close-up of her eyes, now glowing white like Blue's, leaving her helpless. Transition to Blue's glowing eyes, IRL, where he too stands still. One notable chunk of conversation that was never going to make it into the script was some debate we had over what the level 2 psionic power Brainlock actually does, because I think the wording is confusing. In the expanded Psionics Handbook, which, despite the name, is the basic, default Psionics book for 3.5 edition, the description says, "The subject's higher mind is locked away. He stands dazed, unable to take any psionic actions, including manifesting powers or using psionic feats that require a decision to be used, nor any mental actions at all. A brain-locked subject is not stunned, so attackers get no special advantage against him. A brain-locked flyer must ascend to the closest safe level area below it. An air-breathing swimmer must make for the surface." Like many spells, especially in 3rd Ed, the flavor text and actual relevant parts of the description are often mixed together, which is unhelpful. In this case, Paul, Blues player, thought it should lock down the creature entirely, but for some reason they kept their dex bonus to armor class. Whereas my reading was, given the flyers could still fly, swimmers could still swim, and the special text about can't use any mental actions, I thought targets could still do, like, regular melee attacks. No special abilities, no feats, etc. Now, we went through some civil, but somewhat aggravated, debate over this. Obviously, my version made the spell a little questionable, and definitely very situational, whereas Paul's version made it pretty strong. But we eventually sorted it out, and the key is that it says dazed. It says so in what appears to be the qualitative flavor text part, not what sounds like the crunchy rules part. So stupid. But dazed is a status in 3rd Ed D&D, and if you assume the effect of Brainlock is to daze the target and treat the rest as just clarification text, the power makes way more sense. So that's what we eventually settled on, the version where I was wrong, mostly. It's strong, but not so strong if you compare it to Hold Person, a level 2 divine spell which makes the target paralyzed, which is actually defenseless, for 1 round per level. That target gets a new saving throw each round to break free, but without requiring the caster to spend their own action every round. The version of Brainlock on the 3.5 SRD websites appears to be much more clearly worded, though I guess it leaves readers to figure out what happens if a flying creature is dazed. Now, one thing I didn't bother to show in the episode, even though I kind of wanted to because it looks cool, is that the druid actually had a flame blade cast. The spell Flame Blade, meaning she was holding a sword, made of flame. And Brainlock stops the target from taking any actions at all, but that buff would still be active, making her feel dangerous to stand close to, even when brainlocked, in case she got out somehow. A flaming sword would look like crap if not animated, though, and in addition to drawing it, it would be another constantly looping animation, which is a pain to work with in some ways. Again, the boss in TDDC 66 had 3 different looping animations, which made them a nightmare. Now you may wonder, did Jinx prematurely killing a druid deny the party important information? Many people have heard by now, probably multiple times, that during this campaign I laid out various evidence of factions and sinister antagonists who are acting behind the scenes, and in almost every case the party managed to avoid finding those clues, somehow, constantly. Not by making bad choices, well, not usually. Not through crappy die rolls, just by surprising me, and me failing to improvise quickly enough to adjust to those unexpected moves. So, naturally, you might assume this is one of those cases. Nope. It's true they didn't get any useful info from this druid, other than cleansers don't like whatever blue is. But the interrogation couldn't have gone much further, because she didn't have any more info. So, here's the thing. The druids of this encounter don't have the strongest motivation, narratively. In the show, they actually have more reason to attack the party than they originally did. Having the lead druid witness Blue's attempted murder in the Ugly Mug ties it together better. The original, very thin premise was that one of them had noticed Blue at the bar, just his existence, and decided that he was some twisted arcane experiment. And I mean, they're not wrong. Of course, the real reason they were attacked by cleanser druids is that for pacing I wanted a combat encounter, but setting-wise, I had written myself into a slight corner in that the roads in Tark are supposed to be pretty safe, especially here in northern Tark, but still far from the desert. Now, obviously, it's a D&D world. I can put in whatever the hell kind of encounters I want, but to me, they've got to make sense with the story. Like, I can write whatever crazy bad guys and plot I want, where I want, and encounters will flow from that. But for random encounters, I don't do real random encounters, but the things that fill the same role as a random encounter table, I want them to feel diegetic, meaning if it's not tied to the greater story, then it has to at least make sense for the location in the world. And that's where I kind of wrote myself into a corner with the safe highway thing. But you know what you can run into in Tark? People. Including druids. Including cleansers, who are like regular druids, but prone to attacking player characters for stupider reasons. Anyway, I'm sure that killing all these violent, fanatical druids, in self-defense, will have no further consequences. So we haven't gone into a lot of detail on how Uhamisho's totemist powers, the Incarnum system, actually works. And I know most people, hell, even many of you who have played 3rd Ed D&D, don't know about it. Here's the shortest version I can manage. A totemist, or incarnate, the other main class from the Magic of Incarnum book, knows a number of Soulmelds, which are buffs, and he can shape, meaning buff himself with, a number of them each day, kind of like a wizard or cleric's spells per day. But Soulmelds last all day, and shaping them is too slow for combat, so you generally shape them all first thing in the morning, at the end of your long rest. Each Soulmeld has a power or bonus that you always get, and then a couple of other optional powers or bonuses that only work if you bind it, which is basically like equipping it into one of your character's chakras, which the Incarnum book has linked to the typical D&D magic item slots, taking the place of magic gloves, boots, helmet, etc. Which chakras you know how to bind is very limited, based on your class level, although the most notable special ability of the Totemist class is that they have an extra totem chakra slot thing that they can bind even at low levels. Each Soulmeld actually grants different powers depending on which chakra it is bound to, so the power of the totem chakra bind is unique to Totemists, even if other classes can get that same Soulmeld. The other component of the system is Essentia, whereas Soulmelds are kind of using information pulled from the Incarnum layer of reality, the imprinted knowledge, experience, and instincts of every creature that has ever lived. Essentia is the more personal component, the power of your own soul, experience, and will. Levels in Incarnum classes give you a certain number of Essentia points, which you can invest into Soulmelds or Incarnum-based feats to augment their abilities. Where Soulmelds are more or less fixed, lasting all day, Essentia can be moved around as a swift action, which adds a little flexibility to the system. For example, in the morning, Uhamisho shapes the Land Shark Boots Soulmeld. As a level 2 totemist, he can shape up to 3 Soulmelds per day, so he'd have all 3 buffs on him. His other character level is in Barbarian, which doesn't affect this stuff. He can have a single chakra bind, and the only chakra he can access so far is his totem. So he chooses to bind Landshark Boots, which gives him their totem bind ability of 1d6 damage claw natural weapons, and the leap attack. But he still gets the basic ability of +4 to jump checks. At Misho's level, he has 2 total Essentia. The maximum Essentia you can put into any one Soulmeld is capped based on your total character level, including non-Incarnum classes. For levels 1 to 5, you can only put 1 Essentia into each thing, but the Soulmeld bound to the Totem Chakra also gets +1 capacity, so Misho can, and usually does, put both his points into his Landshark Boots, giving his claws +2 to hit and damage, and giving him an additional +4 bonus to jump. That's +2 per Essentia, plus the base of +4, for a total of +8 from this Soulmeld. But he could instead put 1 Essentia into 2 other Soulmelds, which are not his totem, and move them around as a swift action. He can't use that chakra bind feat ability, though, because the Soulmeld is not bound to his feat chakra, and in fact, he doesn't have the ability to do that yet. Now, if you read the flavor text, you would note just this single Soulmeld, as described, has quite a significant effect on the Meld Shaper's appearance, all day long, which may be cool to you, or not, depending on your character concept. The problem is that they are all described that much, which means once you have multiple Soulmelds, you actually look like a distracting mess of blatantly supernatural outgrowths, glowing crowns, and masks and whatever. Plus, they obscure your character's appearance more than most roleplayers would like. So we, and I assume most people using the book, ignore that. I let Quill, Misho's player, describe his Soulmelds basically however he imagines them, and the default, unless he states otherwise, is that they're either not visible, or at least not obvious and distracting, except when he's actually using them. That's why, though Misho's claws, which he describes more as ephemeral, ghostly looking, though they feel quite solid when they tear into you, are not visible most of the time, but become very visible and blatant when he enters combat. Otherwise, as I said at the time, Meld Shapers end up looking like idiots. Like very magical idiots. As for Misho's Lamazu Mantle Soulmeld, I'm not sure how much he keeps using that one later on. I think he may have swapped it out for other stuff, because of the problem that it works based on alignment, and alignment is a not great concept I was already moving away from. +2 armor class against evil attackers is a big bonus, but it's weird to have such a bonus totally reliant not only on what enemies I put in front of them, are we fighting demons and slavers, or humanoids with more depth and complexity, but it's also dependent on this awkward, arbitrary moral framework. Like, these druids are clearly in the wrong, attacking people just because they're different. But from their point of view, they are trying to save the world from being polluted or even destroyed by twisted arcane forces, and they are taking drastic action because, over centuries, their movement has failed to get the rest of the world to do anything about what they see as a moral and existential crisis. Does that make them all automatically evil? Or is it still just individual, which, flipping back from the moral perspective to gameplay, is a hidden detail the player can't know without other pain-in-the-ass magic, and therefore can't make informed decisions about? That's why I think 5th edition was wise to change spells like protection from evil and good, ditching alignment and instead working based on a broad list of unnatural creatures like undead, fiends, celestials, elementals, etc. One thing that shocks me is how few dwarven Iron Ration jokes made it into the episode. I mean, they were appropriately mocked and derided while acknowledging their amazing properties, but this was more integrated into the exposition. I mean, obviously, animation and drawing time is the reason I cut this tableau. You see a couple kids who seem to have gotten hold of a wafer, probably stole it somehow, and they're playing frisbee with it. One misses the catch, and the ration hits the wall and just bounces off. It doesn't even chip. They pick it up and throw it again. But for some reason, as I trimmed the script for efficiency and flow, I just didn't find natural places for the cheesy one-liner dad jokes that people in-universe and out make about the notoriously rigid and non-tasty quasi-food. Like, they call them Iron Rations because they feel like iron in your pack, and they feel like iron in your belly. They ought to be called Steel Rations because iron eventually rusts. I heard the recipe was found by an alchemist trying to transmute gold. The formula called for lead, he misread it as bread, so he got Iron Rations instead. Though I honestly don't know why I cut Lorenzo saying, "If they call mine tasty, they must have lost their taste buds in the war." One of the most frustrating things when trying to make an episode is finding out that I'm missing a recording for a week. It always happens here and there. We start playing and I never hit record, or the shitty ancient laptop ran out of space halfway through, or whatever. In this case, I was missing the recording for the session with Port Stormsmith and their Get on the Ship heist, as well as the Firehawk attack shown in the post-credits scene. In this case, though, I definitely remembered the ship heist. It was fun and memorable to me, and I am confident I got all the core elements. Jinx shapeshifting and Adria using Disguise Self-spell to be seen boarding the alternate ship as Jagad and Misho, a ship whose captain they paid off with a cheap bribe because he didn't really have to do anything, moored far from the Sea Wing, and a couple elements which were fun, but probably not necessary for the plan, like Paylor dancing as a distraction, and Blue dropping off the ship to walk back along the bottom. He had to dodge an elude patrol of slaves with sharks, but we didn't do a whole encounter of it, so I just did a brief hammerhead pass in the underwater animation bit. Of course, I had to make up all the dialogue for it. It's sad not to have a record of what was actually said, but the show presents it in the most streamlined possible form, without all the twists and turns of 4 people trying to plan something in D&D, but I attributed the plan, which I'm sure was more of a group effort, to Jinx to help button this up as the episode where we learn that Jinx is sneaky. So, I hate not having had the raw material to work from, but I think the result was about as accurate as I could make it from memory. Plus, it's nice that, in video form, I can do the bad guy vision side of it, showing Deputy Envoy Vrog being thwarted. Because when we played it out, the players didn't see that. They just ended up on the right ship without any unwanted guests, so the end result from their point of view was mostly, I guess it worked. My awesome Patreon patrons get Secrets videos about a week early so that I can answer some of their questions in this final video on YouTube, where I read the questions out in random, sometimes ridiculous voices. Like this. As said Banal asked,
"So many questions, so few you can answer without spoilers. One thing's been bothering me. Why did Adria need to disguise herself as Misho? Would the Illude seeing her board the ship not have the same effect of making it look like Jagad was boarding with his employees?"
You know what? The episode kinda skipped a step in the explanation. Not sure how that happened in scripting and editing. I probably just got so used to what I was showing, and it does flow pretty well as is. But they went in disguise as Jagad, the one the observers definitely know, and Misho, the big one, along with Blue. Then Adria and Jinx snuck out as sailors, walked up the ramp again as themselves, so that to anyone counting, it looked like the whole party was aboard the dwarven ship. Give or take that guy dancing out front. That assumes the pursuers actually knew the full members and identities of the party, which they were far from sure of, but of course they were assuming the Illude did know, what with all their invisible scouts and paid informants. Martin asked,
"I'm curious. Is there more than one recipe for alchemical iron rations?"
There are about as many recipes as there are vendors, all either passed down by their ancestors or discovered through alchemical experimentation. Almost all of them claim to have some super secret ingredient or manufacturing process that none of the others have. But for all that, which may even be true in many cases, there has been a sort of convergent evolution to the point that, from an outside assessment, the iron rations all have more or less the same properties, durability, etc. Unless somebody is trying to pawn off false rations which were made incorrectly, just hoping the buyers won't actually have to use them until the slimy seller is long gone. Which is a real danger for a product that is supposed to last for decades, and which nobody in their right mind opens unless it's a real emergency. That's why reputation becomes so important to this small subculture of Tark's market economy. 3C273 asked,
"What are the actual properties of iron rations? Do they have some hidden magic not mentioned by the dwarves? What happens if they do get wet?"
The episode pretty much explains their whole deal. They don't give you magic buffs or anything. One of those little casks weighs about as much as 2 to 3 days of normal rations for one person, yet provides enough calories and vitamins to survive, unpleasantly, and without ever feeling full if you stretch them this far, for as long as 60 days. They do this while being almost immune to the effects of time as long as you keep them dry. They don't rot, and mold and insects don't get into them, and they will reliably remain edible for decades. There are enough tales of people surviving off centuries-old iron rations that it's hard to discount them all, though in those cases the rations were probably under completely airtight seals, which is not standard. And obviously, they aren't suitable for consumption unless soaked, usually for an hour, though no heat is required, and you can, famously, use seawater for this task, which is important because they're mainly purchased by sailors as emergency supplies in case of shipwreck. Some dwarves claim they actually taste better when you use salt water, but that's kind of like taste testing different types of paper. Now, anything that is remotely edible has an expiry date, so even though these miraculous alchemical rations seem almost frozen in time, if their container is damaged and water gets in, or if they get exposed to a significant amount of moisture and humidity. Again, most of these casks aren't 100% airtight over the long term. That risks starting the clock on them in a biochemical sense. Certainly though, if you splash a little water on a wafer, then leave it, that can open it up to the forces of aging, such that it might go bad within months or even weeks. Even then though, sometimes the damage is localized. If you are able to cut off the bad parts, other parts that have remained dry enough probably still end up being safe because the mold or whatever could not get into them. MathGSS asked,
if you can answer, how dangerous are the cleanser druids? Are they just a small group of radicals, or a potential threat to the entire region?
Well, they aren't known to get out much lately, but not hearing about them makes it hard to judge. But once upon a time, they were quite formidable, as told in the old Basics the Elves video. Nine asked,
are there any monitors that you have written up that use Incarnum magic?
I haven't done any that really focus on it. Like proper power gamers, both Diluvian and Illud monitors occasionally splash a level or two, or maybe a feat on it, just to stack more bonuses. Monitors have so many bonus feats. The classes in Magic of Incarnum are relatively well balanced, as long as you're single-classed, or at least you're only working with options from that book plus the player's handbook. They work in a certain way, their abilities scale a certain way. For example, you can get pretty big bonuses to certain skill checks, but there's nothing within the book that lets you really abuse those bonuses. It's when you start combining these tools with other options from the massive number of other 3.5 edition books that you can start to find either crazy combos, like getting plus 10 to skill checks from a Soulmeld, and using that with some poorly designed class ability that works based on your total skill check result, or just find ways to stack a little extra armor class for cheap, or other little efficiencies to boost a multi-classed build. Rinsaku Blade asked, what are you able to tell us about the Changeling infiltrator group that Jinx is a part of? Are they mostly based around Targ, or are they spread all over the world? What is their goal? I can tell you that, unlike the Yellowcloaks mercenaries from Pelor's backstory, this group of changelings extends far beyond the Tark-Larek Peninsula. Grim Reaper asked,
out of curiosity, would the group have come to a bad end type of scenario if they didn't skip town after the Illud invite?
Would they have come to a bad end if they'd gone to the embassy as invited? No, of course not. Deputy Envoy Vrog was sent to join up with Jagad's expedition, and to help them through any bureaucracy that might come up. I'm not being sarcastic. That's what Vrog was told to do. And Ambassador Bolrod clearly wants to screw around with Vrog and whoever sent him. So it's actually plausible that he may have tipped off Jagad more for his own amusement than for the archaeologist's benefit. Although Jagad does seem to trust Bolrod, at least in regards to this. Anyway, I'm sure you are already subscribed, liked the video, etc., but If you want to make sure you don't miss any of my videos, the safest way, since you can't trust YouTube even if you click the bell, is to follow me on whichever social media site you hate the least. You can find me on most of them, Shitter, Threads, freaking Mastodon, by going to demonac.com/name of site, example, demonac.com/discord, or demonac.com/bluesky, all lowercase. Sea of Secrets Episode 4 is coming, funded, as always, by my patrons at patreon.com/demonac. Listen, you don't have to give to my Patreon, though I'm super thankful if you do. But if you can afford a couple bucks a month, please pick some small creator. Somebody who makes stuff you love that doesn't have a huge audience, and support their Patreon or YouTube membership or whatever. Because if just 1,000 people care enough to give like $2 a month, you have the power to make something exist. And that's really cool. And the patrons who support me, you're why I'm able to make Sea of Secrets as my job, and hopefully other things too, if I can ever get my act together. Anyway, if you want more D&D videos while waiting for the Sea Wing, I've been hanging out with Bone Wizard, who had me voice a character in his latest video. It's not telling a story the same way, but he's doing a series on how you should buff the 5e classes and subclasses who need it. Right now he's fixing monks, and you might hear some more stuff we're doing together in the not-so-near future. Just search YouTube for Bone Wizard. Thanks again to all my patrons, with a special shout-out to
Aether Mordu, Administrator Orange, Andrew Drake, Alberio, Aust Aurelius, Bedimir, Bessie, Captain Rook, Brethren, Carnlin, Critical Hit 20, Darkwood, Demon, Dragonloot, Draugr, Earl of Sanguine, Eckardir Thalion, Fey Crossroads, Fireborn, Gator Island, Fright Knight, Gorefiend, General M.O., 9, Hakoon, Lieutenant Red, Lonito, Lord Aben, Malison Desh, Matt the Mage, Mars Project, MG3D, Norgren OI1, Olden Man, Overlord Thor, Pedrig of Rooney, Pontus Quackers, Ramar Ulfist, Tembu and June, Rex, Rewoot, Skyter97, Stan the Man, Starfall, Cygax, Toshiro 7, Volkfang, Valis, W.A. Soul, Warsaw, Woodley, and Zombie. The esteemed members of the organization.